we put about, I think it's about $300,000 to $350,000 back into the local economy, every time that we host it. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
Greetings, neighbors. Welcome to another episode of the Perfect Sense podcast. I'm your host, Alex Becerra. I am really excited. We're going to be having an uplifting conversation with a Sacramento business owner, Shawn Kahan. Shawn, really glad you're able to join us today. Before we jump in, would you mind just telling our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and your connection to Sacramento?
Yeah, so mahalo for having me. I'm really grateful to be here. My name is Shawn, and I'm the co-owner of the Yellow Brick Group, and we are a local creative agency here in Sacramento, and we do work anywhere from brand identities for a local restaurant all the way to like big marketing campaigns for Uber and Epic Games, etc. So a lot of different work, creatively, all in between, kind of said folks, and we also try to spend a certain amount of our time in the community, and one of those events that we host is called the Our Street Night Market, and it takes place this September 5th. So hope we're able to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to have somebody here that is a creative and really works with artists. I think it's such an important part of the identity of our region. And your story in particular is really impactful. Would you mind just kind of telling us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, I had an interesting kind of pathway to where I got to. Candidly, I was kicked out of 3 high schools, and I started my first business when I was 17, and it was a clothing company. It didn't have a name. I was actually just hustling shirts out of the trunk of my car. And then, that led me to a number of different things. I learned kind of a lot through that experience. How to wear a bunch of hats, right? So I had to be the person running the finances. I had to be the person designing the thing. I had to be doing sales. So learning about all of that. And then in particular, I really kind of was enamored by the idea of building brands. And so I was kind of leaning towards that and kind of being pulled towards that. And so I started working with a bunch of smaller people within Sacramento, helping them build their brands. And then I really got a break when DeMarcus Cousins from the Sacramento Kings was drafted. And his manager had come to town looking for people to be in touch with here. Yeah. And his name is Andrew. He's really, really good at his job. And he connected with a lot of different people in Sacramento, and I was one of them. And eventually we became friends, and I started working on DeMarcus's project. And so, collectively with, a bunch of different people that, Andrew had built a team around. We'd worked on his project, and from there, got noticed for that. David Garibaldi, who's a visual artist, reached out, and a number of other different people reached out for me to help build their brands. And I realized I had multiple different business cards and working on a number of different projects. And I was like, is there a container I can put this all in? What am I doing here? What is this? I literally Googled it. Yeah. It was oh, this sounds like you are running a creative agency, and so that was just how I started. It's maybe I should just start a company that services, I didn't even know that existed. And so that was my journey, from about 18 to starting the company in 2018.
Excellent. I love so much about that, the mention of the Kings. I think as somebody who'd spent my entire life in this region, it's for better or worse, the Kings are ingrained in the community, right? They do so much to really, I think, uplift just so much about what the region is all about. And you mentioned David Garibaldi. I've been fortunate to see him do his thing live multiple times, and just it speaks really to just how unique I think the Sacramento region is, and how we really I don't know. I think oftentimes art and creative gets overlooked. Now, speaking of the night market, our street night market, that, would you say it's fair to say that's your flagship thing? That's sort of the main thing that you kind of build and have built?
Yeah, absolutely. We launched the night market the same year we launched our company. And I would not suggest that to anybody. It's a lot to take on.
Yeah.
But I think the real kind of lesson there is, in actuality, I would tell people just to try to be really self-aware.
Yeah.
And so being self-aware, we understood that we had that in our bag, right? We had done a lot of different community activations, large scale events before.
Yeah.
And so owning the agency, we felt this would be something that we could handle and we could deliver. And so for that reason, we went out and tried to execute it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wouldn't suggest doing both, starting a company and then starting like a really like large scale event. But yeah, it's turned into that. I think the question was, is it our marquee event? It's definitely turned into that for sure.
Yeah. And, we had a chance to chat a little bit before the podcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like the first year the night market went up, it was 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And you maybe had like some pretty humble expectations of what the turnout was going to be. And then it sort of turned into like a blockbuster event.
Yeah.
And of course, 2018, 2019, that's leading right up to everyone's favorite time, the COVID disruption.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about like kind of that experience getting it off the ground, and then maybe navigating that disruption and bringing it back to what it is now.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in like writing everything in pencil first, right? Because it's always going to change. And we're also a big believer in like letting the market speak. But initially, we wanted this to be like more frequent, and it was kind of an answer to a lot of different things. But one of the things that we were trying to provide a solution for was like late night options in terms of like food in Sacramento.
Yeah,
it's like pretty scarce. So we're like, oh, if we have like a night market, it could be something that people can enjoy frequently.
Yeah.
So we're like, okay, one city block. We'll try this out. We'll see what how people interact with it, and yeah, I don't know. We expected a few hundred people, and about 11,000 showed up. And I realized that very quickly that this was more of like a larger event, like a festival setting.
Yeah.
At least how people, again, the market kind of spoke and like how they wanted to experience it. So yeah, we kind of shifted the concept into that space.
And then in terms of like that R Street sort of, I guess, that part of the neighborhood, your roots run pretty deep there. Can you tell us like about just sort of what you've built there, but sort of like how your roots are connected to R Street?
Yeah, I love that question. So I was living in Midtown from the time I was like 17, like right when I turned 17, I was living in Midtown on my own. I mentioned that I got kicked out of 3 high schools. Like I also got kicked out of my house. So mom was like, hey, like, you're making big kid decisions, go be a big kid, And so I started living on P Street, downtown, shout out P Street. And I actually had to eventually move away for a couple of years. I was living closer to Sac State, and I really wanted to be in Midtown, downtown, because that's a lot of where the creative energy is.
Yeah.
And it's harder for like a creative entrepreneur, creative in general, to like afford that type of lifestyle. And so fortunate for me, somebody had introduced me to a man named Ali Yusefi. And he was developing a project called the Warehouse Artist Lofts. And it is a 100-year-old building on R Street that he had converted into artist living. And yeah, his vision was that if he could make it easier for artists to make ends meet, then we would all spend more of our time making our city a more beautiful place. And that is just like such a beautiful mission. And he was super young at the time when he delivered the building. He was like 33 years old. And just at that young age, I was like, this is incredible. Like someone with this type of vision to be able to actually deliver something like that was incredible to me. So quickly, like I gravitated towards him, and he became a friend and a mentor. Unfortunately, at the age of 36, he had passed away. And that was really tough for all of us, especially those who have the opportunity to live at his building. And so, my business partner and I, who both live there, we decided that we needed to prove him right? Like we needed to like see this vision out and prove him right. And so I'm always excited to be able to talk on platforms like this about him and about his vision, because I think that this is again, like this mission that, we're trying to live out of, like proving him right, that if you invest in artists and you invest in creatives, like we will then go on and be able to invest back into the community and make our city, more beautiful. So it's a lot of the reason why we started the night market.
And to that point, I think it's remarkable how investment in creative arts has such a large impact. Because as you mentioned, like being a working artist and making ends meet almost feels like an oxymoron, right? It feels like you're supposed to be a struggling artist. And I love that you mention Ali and sort of like how he was really dedicated to like making that investment and seeing it come to fruition. And you strike me as sort of like a keeper of the flame of like, okay, we had this really impactful mentor. Again, really unfortunate. We hate when we lose people that we love. And it's amazing that you and your business partner were like, okay, the foundation has been set. Now we've got to carry that torch and keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt the weight. Like I definitely felt the weight. I remember there was a number of different memorials. I mean, he was a very loved person, as you can imagine. And the Warehouse Artist Lofts wasn't the only like subsidized living project that he had like produced and delivered in downtown Midtown. And so he had provided so much opportunity for, you know, different people in Sacramento. So when he had passed away, there was like all these city officials and all, you know, different likes, you know, folks that showed up, but also like all the residents that from all the buildings that showed up. And his like service was at the Golden One Center. Like this is how like much impact like this man had.
Yeah.
And I remember just like literally I had to like go outside and like stretch because I felt like so much pressure and like weight like physically, like you know, it's like, you know, transpiring into like a physical sense. And yeah, you know, so it was like very clear, very apparent what needed to happen, what still needs to happen, because I'm still living in that building, and you know, I just had like my first child, and being able to like, you know, bring him into that space, you know, is you know, obviously a beautiful thing, but being able to provide my family a life because I was able to take more risk is something that I hope that many people understand is so important. And we can go on and deliver things like the night market. We can go on and deliver things like the other projects that we've worked on. And I'm just one person, you know, so imagine, you know, the multipliers of that, you know, giving creators more opportunity, I think is absolutely a multiplier.
Yeah, and speaking of the night market, like I've never experienced it. I would say I'm very much not in the know. I would say it's a blind spot for me. But, you know, having learned a little bit about you, can you tell us like what sort of inspired that specific idea of a night market? Like why did a night market seem like the right thing to sort of pursue and get off the ground, especially in terms of like just enhancing the quality of life for our neighbors in Sacramento?
Love that question. So as I was saying, once Ali passed, we realized like we really needed to do something, but we didn't know what that was, right? So we were going to take our time. We're going to be patient with it. At the same time, I was spending every last dollar I had traveling. Being a creative, you know, like personally, like where I draw inspiration from is experiences. And so I just realized like very quickly that traveling was like just feeding that creative energy. And we were seeing like the results of that, you know, within our business. And so I was more than happy, you know, to continue to like go broke traveling. And so I was all over Asia at the time, and I was in Taiwan and Taipei specifically. And I realized that they had night markets like in every neighborhood. It wasn't just like an attraction. It was a function of the neighborhood. It's like how the neighborhood functioned. And it was like very blue collar, right? So everyone gets off of work, you know, and they get their kids and they go eat like pretty much at the same table, like one long table. The kids run around, there's like games to be played, and yeah, neighbors break bread together. And so I like almost immediately realized like this is it. Like this is what needs to come to Sacramento. There was nothing like that at the time. And I realized that, you know, I always look at Sacramento as a blue collar town, not in the sense of like, you know, we have steel mills and things like that, but in the sense that like we're not LA, we're not San Francisco, you know, we don't have like, you know, big tech here, and we all have like, you know, everyday jobs, right? And we work those everyday jobs. So I see that, you know, parallel to what I saw in Taiwan. And I thought, you know, I think Sacramento's would really enjoy something like this. And again, you know, something was supposed to be a function, and I wanted it to be, you know, maybe every Saturday or every night even, but it ended up becoming what it was. But yeah, that was the kind of original inspiration from that. And we started that project like while I was in Taiwan. Like I, you know, phoned back home. It's like, this is it. Like, let's start to get going. And the name, you know, is like a double entendre. It's like we live on our street, but we call it our street because we live there. So that's all how it came together, all in real time.
And part of that, like sort of that experience traveling, and also the I guess love for the night market setup, some of that speaks a little bit to like your heritage, right? Your cultural background.
Yeah.
Tell us a little more.
Yeah, so I'm Hapa, so I'm half Hawaiian, Asian, and then my mom's white, so I'm half white, and she's English. Yeah, so that's like an interesting dynamic just to like be in and live in every day. And so growing up, I would, you know, go see my father's side of the family, and it was very different, right? You know, culturally, and would come home and it would be very different as well. But as I got to a certain age, like teenage years, I really just didn't want anything to do with it because, you know, you don't want to be different, right? And you don't want to you know, do anything or say anything or, you know, like have any like, you know, those like cultural moments that might like expose you. And like it pains me to say, you could probably see it in like within my whole like, you know, demeanor right now. It just pains me to say it because it's a really like difficult time in my life. But my popo, she was 96 and she would like, you know, do Tai Chi. She was very healthy. She would do Tai Chi every morning, and she was living a great life, but she actually took a fall. She had bumped her head, and I realized like going to kind of her bedside, and she was kind of staring it down, which was very unfortunate. But um, fortunate for me, I had this realization of like, wow, like all of her stories like are gonna go with her, right? And I was like desperate to like be closer to that and understand that, and that was when I just flipped the switch, sorry, and started to like dive deeper into like my Asian heritage, especially my Hawaiian heritage, and so started traveling to Asia a lot and trying to kind of chase that story and understand who I was. And then I joined a halau here in Sacramento, so I've been dancing hula for like the past 6 or 7 years.
Nice.
Yeah, studying Hawaiian language and all things within the Hawaiian culture. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, when we're younger, it's like your identity very much feels like influenced by your environment
Mhm.
and like who you interact with and stuff. But I think, I mean, I would say I could relate. As you get older, you start to realize like, oh, all the parts of my identity are really coming from within, and it's this invisible line that
Yeah.
attaches me to like my entire lineage. And so I love to hear that you're sort of like kind of rediscovering that and
Mhm.
taking the time and spending it, because it's so easy to be overlooked, I think, for a lot of people to like really kind of do that digging and say like, well, yeah, I'm me as my individual, but then like, what is me at the core of myself?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. I think that sorry, my favorite quote actually is the most personal is the most creative. And yeah, I think when you understand who you are, I was talking about self-awareness earlier. I think that is the most creative work you can do, because there's only one you, right?
Yeah.
And so when you understand who you are and what your stories are, and your kapuna, like the people that like have made up your story, um, yeah, I mean, there's nothing more creative than that, and so I think if I could give any advice to anyone, I don't think it's just like on a creative scale. I think is when you do peel back those layers and understand who you are as much as you can. I think it provides things in your life that you might not even have known, whether that is the smallest or on some of the largest, things that could have impact on what you're doing.
One thing that's really apparent in talking with you is just like how deep your passion goes for supporting community and supporting small business. You mentioned you started off really young, so you had to like, the best way to learn sometimes is to do, right? So when you're a teenager and you're starting to fend for yourself and build your own business, there's obviously a lot that goes into that.
Mhm.
If you were to start from zero again
Mhm.
and like have that sort of starting point, what would you think about in terms of like how you sort of build things and scale them and really sort to, I guess, build that network of like community support?
Yeah, I was mentioning I got kicked out of my house at around 17 years old, and so I was a grid kid. I was like living on the grid basically. I would just go home to sleep basically, right? And a lot of time I spent was within the different small businesses that were, within Midtown, specifically like around the corner of J and 24th. And that's where I met a ton of different people that are, it's interesting, like a lot of like lineage from that time that have like gone off and done a lot of different things in Sacramento. But there was shops like Havoc, United State, Dragatomi, and we were all the shop kids that hung around there, writing graffiti, skating, throwing parties, things like that. And so part of like understanding like the kind of like fabric of Sacramento's like community was like living out those days with those small business owners and realizing that like what was impactful to them, what was hard for them, what made their lives more difficult, turned the lights on and like help them feed their families. And so that was like a lot of like education. But one thing that stuck out to me was Second Saturday was like huge for those businesses, right? Not only were they able to make ends meet, like almost like pay the month's rent through that event, but they were exposed to like so many more people. So that was like an interesting moment, like interesting chapter in my life for many reasons, but it definitely showed me the importance of like gathering people around um, others that have really great ideas and the things that they're delivering, to community. So that's like, the initial kind of like influence, inside of that. And then I think the next kind of question, the segue question was, how to like build and scale like within that. To me, I've always been a big believer in just providing as much value as I can and just really trying to get to know people and who they are and like what actually moves it out for them, like I was saying, and what's difficult for them. And I think when we know those things about people, like I always just keep inventory of that, right? Like, okay, like they said that this was a challenge, or they said that like they were looking for this, right? And then when you're talking to other people, oftentimes they're wanting the same things, or they have things that they don't have. And what I've always liked to do is just like connect those people, right? And I was never thinking about it in terms of like, oh, there needs to be some type of ROI there. It was always like, okay, how can I just help like make these connections with people and then, bring as much value as I can. Later on, that's been like very fruitful for me because I've always been a type of person who's just, again, trying to connect dots, trying to bring value. And so naturally, like, for example, like throwing the night market, right? Being able to draw on, the inspiration and knowledge and experience, it was great, but also like draw on actual like people that, we've been working with for many, many years and collaborate with them to help bring that idea to fruition.
I would tend to agree with so much of that because I think one thing you speak to is really that connection between people. And I mean, I tend to be of this mindset where it's like, whether people are aware of it or not, whether they're conscious of it, everything intersects, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everything in your community is intersecting, and the people is sort of like the core element of that. And, one thing we wanted to use kind of this conversation to do is really to kind of, shine a light or give some hope to people that maybe are looking to have that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, but they're very much at the beginning stages of it.
Yeah.
So like, talk a little bit about the challenges that you face. Like, what does it look like in terms of like the operations behind things, finding funding?
Yeah.
Obviously there are certain pain points, and, as an entrepreneur, you do have to constantly be willing to like face the challenge and find a way to overcome it.
Yeah. I have a lot to say about that topic. I don't want to leave the community part yet.
Okay.
There's a Hawaiian word called kapilina, or it's a phrase called kapilina, and it literally means the connections. And a lot of the Hawaiian language is built on these phrases, and it's not just like a word or a phrase, it's like a way of life, right? So kapilina is like a way to live, it's like building those connections, the connections that we have with people, the connections that we have with nature, the aina, the land, etc. And so I actually believe like if more people lived in that way, right? And again, not looking for like any type of ROI, it's just like, let's just continue to like build stronger roots, stronger connections with one another. I think we would just have like much stronger, community. And moving on to challenges, plenty. Right. Plenty of challenges. And I think as an entrepreneur, like very early on, I realized that's just a part of it. Right. So starting my own business, I realized it was a part of it. I was mentioning like being around a lot of other small businesses. It was just always like around, and so I think that I benefited from acceptance and just understanding like, oh, this is just a part of it, right? Like this is just a part of like how business operates and works. Of course, we work very hard to avoid those things, right? We work very hard to like not have to, take challenges head on and just kind of like have a smoother path. But that's just not reality, like in life either, Yeah. And so, I think some of the basic, challenges are, like getting anything off the ground is difficult. But I think just starting somewhere, being self-aware, I think it's, again, some of my, biggest like starting out advice is just like try to be as self-aware as you can, understand who you are, because I think there's cool, you can be interested in things, and I think we're all interested in things, right? I'll give you a great example. I'm a huge Sacramento Kings fan, huge basketball fan, right? But I'm not gonna be lacing up my shoes and shooting threes at the Gold One Center, right? But because I'm self-aware and I understand like what my skill sets are, my strengths are, eventually that led me to working with one of the best Kings players that's ever played for the team. And so for me, it's just about being self-aware about what you're into, but also about like where you're supposed to be deploying. And I think that's really big, because like I don't think everyone's supposed to be a business owner, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you're a very strong like supporting like role, and I always like make the analogy like, what if you were like the number 10 person at like Twitter or something like that, and then they like sell, but you were self-aware enough to that you were like, that's where you thrive. And so I think self-awareness is huge, and so like that's a I think really big part of it. And then moving on like into like actually starting, one thing that I would say to people, if you hadn't got the thing off the ground yet, whether that's like a business or just like a career path and that you want to go down, is there is so many nonprofits around our region and the world, right? And so going back to self-awareness, like what are you into? What do you want to be doing? I guarantee you that there's something that's like in and around that space that needs your help, right?
Yeah.
Needs bodies, needs people. And if you're looking to say get into social media marketing, maybe you can apply that. If you're looking to get into event production, maybe you can apply that to them. If you're looking to get into like human resources, like whatever it is, right? Looking for things to apply to and work for free, right? I know that's hard, right? It's a hard thing to hear. It's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But I really believe in that. I really believe in just like getting a portfolio of work. And you're not really working essentially for free. You're working to create impact when you're working for nonprofits and things like that. So it's a great place to start. And then if you have already started and you're already going and you're looking to like scale your business, I think my kind of last piece of advice is to be patient. It's really hard. Because if you grow really fast, it's always easy to hire people. It's very, very hard to have to sit down and let people go.
Yeah.
And so, and also scaling isn't always the answer. I actually had a business killed because we scaled too fast. So my first business, I was telling you, I was selling T-shirts. That turned into a company, turned into a brand, and then it turned into a company. And we were in 80 stores worldwide, and that actually killed our company because we scaled too fast. And we were doing like a lot of like, there was some like COD, which is like cash on delivery, but it was a lot of net terms, right? Yeah. And anyone that's in product knows that when you start to do net terms, net 15 turns into net 30, and then it turns into net never, right? And so having to cycle that, and handle that was like really difficult. And so, so I just, I think, if you're already in it, and you're already doing it and you're like really wanting to scale your company and take it to the next level, I feel you. I understand that, and you should have that aspiration, but just be patient. You'll know when it's time to grow. And that's some like broken up pieces of advice.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your candor. And I think it's so important to kind of mention like things that work, things that are maybe cautionary tales. Shout out to my accounting and business professors at Sierra College for the net 15, net 30. And no, it's so great because like one thing I always sort of think of life in terms of these Venn diagrams of like sort of like, you and I contrast each other in a pretty interesting way because you're driving the entrepreneurial, you're at the wheel, you're doing the thing. And I very much am like, well, I've been in my career, I've been in this company for 12 years. Like I've been very fortunate to sort of find, people hate it, but like work-life balance or stability. But I do find that it's so important when you can, kind of to your point about like finding ways to enhance your skills or like learn new things, you've got to pour into like all of the different aspects of yourself. So for me, it's like, I feel very fulfilled by my work. I'm also super passionate about like being a dad and being a husband, but then volunteerism is huge. Like it's such a huge and important way to really get involved in the community. And to your point, if there's one thing that's true about Sacramento, there is a really strong community of nonprofit work. So if it's like, if you're looking for purpose in your life, if you're looking for meaning, or perhaps maybe where our philosophies align is like having a service oriented mindset, which I think is like, you've got to show that you can do for people before you start asking for stuff in return. I think that's so valuable to really call that out because again, kind of the point of intersections, like we've got people and families, we've got businesses, and we've got this nonprofit ecosystem, and they all have to be in support of each other, I think. Would you say that's fair?
Absolutely. I love what you said about, that the impact piece because, it's one thing, like I was saying, I think I was using the example as like a portfolio piece, but I love what you said about the impact because I think if you're looking to provide service or create products or whatever it is that you, are thinking about doing, if you're thinking about getting into business, you do, in my opinion, to create longevity, have a sustainable company, you actually have to have like a very pure mission and goal, and that needs to be serving people. And so nonprofit is a great place to start because you have to be living in that. First of all, you're probably not getting paid or getting paid very little, and it's all about the impact. And so that is a great lesson about like business because if you're able to focus on that, the money's going to come, right? Because people will see through that. They're like, look, this person has like a lot of like good intention, right? And I want to work with people with good intention. 9 times out of 10, they'll work with people who have good intention versus like the person who might have like the bigger resume. So I love that part of that.
So before we kind of start to wrap things up, because I'm loving this conversation, I feel like we could be here for hours. Let's go back to the Our Street Night Market. Now, I would love to give, especially our local audience, sort of a call to action. Tell them, what makes the night market so special, why they want to be involved in it. September 5th, right? So Labor Day weekend. And then perhaps maybe you have some asks of the community that would, help you make this year's version of the Our Street Night Market the best one yet.
Yeah, so we are hosting the 7th rendition of the Our Street Night Market this September 5th. and it is on our street between 11th and 14th, and then some of the side streets that kind of go within that space. And so it's about 7 to 8 city blocks, which makes it one of the largest night markets in the nation. So we're very proud of the growth and like scaling to where it's become, or to what it's become. And I think that the biggest draw, in my opinion, of the night market is that it's all local, right? So we get about 10,000 folks that show up, and we don't book any like national touring acts. We don't have a lot of like huge big names that are performing or like attending. We are building all of this from just local communities. So and I mean that very like specifically. So the dance community is involved. We have the Night Walkers that host like a very fun and exciting dance battle, but also we have dance showcases with like youth groups, youth dance groups, like in between that. And then Casa de Español celebrates Central American Independence Day, like during the market. And so they have a bunch of different Central American food, different kind of like history points and different things that you can learn about, but also they teach like salsa dancing and things like that. We have line dancing. We're going to have mahjong, and these again, like everything has like these like micro like communities that are built in it. So like it's a Sac mahjong crew that like hosts that.
Yeah.
So as you can kind of like hear, there's all these different activations, but they're all being presented by people who are doing this year round, right? So it's about discovery, and I think that's like the biggest draw. You can walk through and discover all these different things, and then the cherry on top is there's a obnoxious amount of street food, and so that to me is again no pun intended, but kind of the cherry on the top of it all is that you can experience some of the best street food in our city, and that's on by design. We work with Visit Sacramento and Sac Farm to Fork a lot, and we appreciate and promote this kind of farm to fork movement. But we believe that that's one side of the coin of the food scene in Sacramento, and the night market is intended to be the other side, right? So mom and pop restaurants, street food, things like this. So that's kind of a long-winded way of like explaining why I think it's really rad, and people end up coming out by the thousands. So hopefully you guys can show up September 5th. You can get your tickets on ourstreetnightmarket.com. That's ourstreetnightmarket.com. And you can follow us at Our Street Market on Instagram. And I mean, if there's anybody out there that is looking to help support us, financially, it is quite the undertaking, to pull off for our city and for our community. And is the hardest thing for us to do is to fundraise. So if there is anyone out there that is interested, we create a very strong partnerships with our partners, and maybe there's one or two of you folks out there that want to partner with us.
Yeah, one of my like personal philosophical taglines, if you will, is like, if you want to experience someone's culture, the music and the food, those are like your two quickest avenues to really immerse yourself and figure it out. Sounds like the Our Street Night Market is really blending a lot of those things, right? It's bringing all the culture together. And, as much as we talk about, I guess, the nation being a melting pot, I think Sacramento really is the microcosm of like, you've got all the communities all mingling and again, really being in support of one another. So love to hear about what you're doing. And then in terms of like timing wise, when does the night market open, and when is it like, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here?
Yeah. So it goes from 5 to 11. And I love that because at 11, again, there's a lot of different restaurants and bars that are open that people can go to and patronize. And again, that's what it's all about. It's like about bringing and going back to what I was talking about Second Saturday early on, understanding that, it was like, I was so happy to be able to deliver that, to literally where I live is, bringing people, probably their rent, for the month that day. And so I'm very proud of that. We put about, I think it's about $300,000 to $350,000 back into the local economy, every time that we host it. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of.
Yeah, and in addition to the restaurants and the bars, like anytime I'm on that side of town, it's like, because I'm in Placer County, so it's like, if I'm coming to town, I'm going to make it worth my while. I can't stop without Rick's Dessert Diner, man.
It's right there on J Street.
Red Velvet, man.
Calls to you.
Go-to.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's hard to pass it up without going in.
No, yeah, this has been really awesome. Before we move into like our final piece, our lightning round, are there any last thoughts you want to sort of like share with our audience, and just, kind of things you want to get out there before we wrap up?
No, I'm just grateful. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you guys again for having me. I think, if I could leave anybody with anything is what I was saying earlier, is like, that's all just got to keep trying to like build stronger connections with one another, and moving forward in positive ways and finding ways to bring value to what we're doing. It's been a great experience, being here. Thank you.
Beautiful. All right, so now it's time for my favorite part of the show, our lightning round. I'm just going to hit you with some rapid fire questions and want to hear your thoughts. So,
Okay, let's go.
first one, my favorite question is, are there any small local businesses, restaurants, cafes that you want to shout out while you're here?
Well, they would kill me if I don't shout out our own business, which is Hanai Shave Ice. So we have a small shave ice business that's right in the ice blocks behind Good Neighbor. So check that out, 1701 R Street. Go get some shave ice. We have musubi, we have poke. So go check that out. I definitely have to just have that drop. But also, I really love Camellia Coffee on R Street. It's like right across from my house, and those are good friends of mine. Micah Pizzeria, which is on 16th. Incredible. They do incredible things there. Southside Super, which is in Southside Park, which is my favorite neighborhood in Sacramento. They do an incredible job. And then I would really encourage everyone to go out to Little Saigon on Stockton Boulevard and just like walk around and get lost there and eat banh mi and eat pho and have the time of your life. I think we often get caught in thinking about Midtown and downtown a lot. But I personally think that South Sacramento as a whole is one of the most slept on food destinations in the nation. Like, I really believe that.
Yeah, for sure. And audience members, I feel like the show notes get slept on. Check the show notes because I'm going to put links for all those shout outs in there. And correct me if I'm wrong. One thing I think I know about you is that you're big into anime.
Yeah.
Give me like top 3.
Oh my God. That's
if
such
I'm a newcomer into anime, what do I absolutely need to check out?
Well, I think I grew up in the era of Toonami. So like Dragon Ball Z, Gundam Wing, Sailor Moon, big Sailor Moon fan, shout out Sailor Moon. So I would put like Dragon Ball Z has to operate like in a separate space. Like I just, that one just operates in a separate space. We can't even like have it on the list. But I would say Naruto, it's such a great story and it just resonates with me and like my life and what he like has to go through in that story. So I love Naruto. But I also like some old school stuff, Cowboy Bebop. I really love because of the animation. I love the music in Cowboy Bebop. And then, God, what else? Maybe I'll shout out like something new. So like Fearin' just came out, and that's like a really beautiful story and beautiful animation. But the story is about time and like our association with time, because she lives like basically forever, but the people she comes along with like in her journey are like more like human, and they only have like a certain like time span, and she doesn't really understand like time the way that they do, and so she starts to have to like reckon with that. And so yeah, I guess I could say Fearin' right now is like a really good one.
Nice. Have you seen Undead Unluck?
It's on the list for sure.
Yeah.
But it's so much to peel back. Like,
no, for sure. It's like my wife is very into anime, and I'm very much like, I'm always just kind of dabbling as she's finding new stuff. But that one was tripping me out.
Yeah.
So if you get time to,
there's literally anime about anything.
Yeah.
Right. Anything that you're like into, there's probably an anime about it.
Yeah, for sure. And we talked a little bit about playing video games with your wife.
Okay.
So I'll let you choose either Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, but who's your go-to fighter?
Oh man. Street Fighter for sure. Like, let me just call that out first. Like, Street Fighter was I mean, I played a lot of Mortal Kombat growing up, but Street Fighter is the one. And man, I hate to say Chun-Li because people like get pissed off about that because you just like spam a lot of times. But I played a lot of Chun-Li. I liked E Honda. So those type of characters that have that type of like function with the kicks and the punches and things like that, I guess. But then I also like the sound bites of like certain characters, like Dhalsim has like really good sound bites. Yoga Fire, Yoga Flame.
Yeah.
Like those, I like sounds in video games. I like sound bites. So sometimes I literally pick characters because of the way they sound.
Nice. Yeah, I go back and forth between like Vega and Blanca. Those are probably like my two.
They both have good sound.
Alternate. Awesome, man. And then the last one, as part of Safe Credit Union, this is a little bit of a financial education show. Mm-hmm. So is there any sort of like, you got a new kid, so I'm sure that's going to paint this picture, but any sort of like personal financial wellness goals that you're actively working towards right now?
Yeah, I'm always a believer in investing in yourself is like the biggest, like ROI you could ever get is just like your education, your experience. Like I talked about traveling a lot. I think it costs you money, but I think it builds you up as like your character and your perspective on the world. So like, that's my first advice. And I know that's like not direct, financial advice. And then I guess I could balance that with something a little bit more, like in the weeds, and a little more tangible is, I wish I would have known like maybe a little bit earlier on about, just like your bank account, versus like, a CD versus like, an ETF versus like, you kind of continue on and get, a little bit more risky. But
Yeah.
I think finding something that gives you a little bit more than what your bank account is going to give you, is like a very just good like initial start. Right. And then I think once you get comfortable in that, and again, it comes back to self-awareness, understanding like what, then maybe, getting into like, more like, stocks that are specific to certain industries, et cetera.
I just love the call out. I always tell folks, I usually day in and day out, I'm out doing education. And I always tell folks like more than anything, just expand your view. Like there's a lot of things out there that people just aren't privy to because they're not looking for it. But if you're trying to make your dollar work for you, right, there's any number of ways you could do that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
really appreciate you taking the time, Shawn. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. And I think you're at least going to have me, my wife, and my 2 kids joining the night market. So you've got 4 more to add to the participants.
And if it's just you guys, we're going to have a blast.
All right. Awesome, man. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
If you'd like to learn more about SAFE products and services and how we can help you, visit our website at safecu.org and schedule an appointment with one of our professional experts today. SAFE is federally insured by NCUA and is an equal housing opportunity lender. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform on topics surrounding financial well-being. This podcast does not constitute financial, tax, or legal advice and may not apply to your individual situation. You should consult with your own financial, tax, or legal advisor for specific information pertaining to your individual situation. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the participants expressing them and do not necessarily reflect those of Safe Credit Union or any of its officials.